Chapter 4: The Careful Construction of a Yoga Practice. How can we realize the qualities of sthira and sukha, the steady alertness and the lightness and comfort of being necessary for a good yoga practice? The Yoga Sutra refers to a beautiful image from Indian mythology to illustrate the concept of sthira sukha. The story tells of Ananta, the king of snakes, floating on the ocean, his long snake body coiled to form a comfortable couch on which the god Vishnu lies. The snake's thousand heads reach up and out like a protective umbrella over Vishnu. On the umbrella rests our earth. The snake's body is soft and gentle enough, Sukha, to serve as a couch for a god, and at the same time is firm and steady enough, Sthira, to support the whole earth. We should endeavor to bring these same qualities of gentleness and steadiness to our asana practice, all the while making sure that we exert progressively less comfort in developing them. In order to attain sthira and sukha, our yoga practice has to be sensible and well structured. When we practice asanas, there is starting point where we begin, just the same as for anything else in life. The starting point for this practice is the condition of our entire being at that present moment. It therefore helps us to know as much as possible about our whole constitution so that we can advance step by step, developing a practice in accordance with our abilities. Developing a yoga practice according to the ideas expressed in the Yoga Sutra is an action referred to as Ninyasa Krama. Krama, Kram is the step. Nyasa means to place, and the prefix V translates as initial way. The concept of Vinyasa Krama tells us that it is not enough to simply take a step. That step needs to take us in the right direction and be made in the right way. Vinyasa Krama thus describes a correctly organized course of yoga practice. It is a fundamental concept in yoga having to do with constructing a gradual and intelligent course for our practice, and is important to employ irrespective of whether we are dealing with asana practice, pranayam, or some other aspect of yoga. We start a practice where we are and look toward a certain goal. Then we choose the steps that will lead us toward realizing that goal and will then gradually bring us back into our everyday life. But our daily practice does not return us to the exact place we started. The practice has changed us. A famous yogi of old name Vamana is reputed to have said that without vinyasa, the asanas of yoga cannot be mastered. The concept of vinyasa krama is useful as a guide for carrying out not only a yoga practice but also all the tasks of our everyday life. To realize the qualities of sthira and sukha in your asana practice, you must first gain an understanding of the steps necessary for preparing your body, your breath, and your attention for the asana you have chosen to practice. You must also consider whether there is an immediate or long term danger of problems arising from the practice of this asana, and if so, determine the poses necessary to bring balance to the breath and body. Counter poses. Yoga teaches us that every action has two effects, one positive and one negative. That is why it is important to be attentive to our actions. We must be able to recognize which effects are positive and which are negative, so that we can then emphasize the positive and try to neutralize the negative. In following this principle in our asana practice, we use postures to balance the possibly negative effects of certain strenuous asanas. We call these neutralizing postures counter poses, or Pratikriyasana. Let's take the headstand as an example. Many people say that they would not make it through the day if they didn't practice Shirsasana, the headstand. First thing in the morning or in the evening, before going to bed, they do a headstand for 10 minutes and they feel very good doing it. They do not prepare in any way for the asana. They simply stand on the head and then they break off their practice. What they often do not notice for a long time to come is the negative effect hidden in this position. Although doing a headstand is good because it reverses the usual effects of gravity on the body, while in the headstand, the weight of the whole body is carried by the neck. A narrow neck, which is designed to carry only the weight of the head, now has to support the whole body. Consequently, after practicing the headstand, it is very important to offset any possible negative effects by doing an appropriate balancing exercise. If we do not, we may experience feelings of dizziness. The neck may over time become chronically stiff, or worse still, the vertebrae in the neck may deteriorate or become misaligned, jamming the nerves between them, a situation that leads to overwhelming pain. Unfortunately, this occurs quite frequently for those who are not studious in using counter poses to balance the effects of the headstand. It is brought home to me again and again how much damage can be caused by practicing in this way. Proper asana practice is not just a matter of advancing step by step to a certain goal. We also have to come back into a position from which we can comfortably resume our everyday activities without experiencing any harmful effects from a practice. Writing about the necessity of counter poses reminds me of an interesting story. I have two brothers. When we were children, we had a very tall coconut palm in our garden. My older brother kept telling me and my other brother that he knew how to climb tall trees like this one. So we challenged him to show us. I can still remember how we taunted him, chanting, "Climb up, climb up." In the end, he did climb the tree. Going up was fairly easy, but when he wanted to come down, he did not know how to do so without falling. There was nobody around who could help him, so he was stuck in the tree for quite a while. So it is with our asana practice. It is not enough to climb the tree. We must be able to get down too. When we do a headstand, we should be able to come back into a normal position without any problems. It is important to balance the headstand with a counter pose such as shoulder stand, Sarvangasana, in order to relieve the pressure on the neck. For any one asana, there may be various counter poses possible, depending on where the tension is felt. Whenever we feel excessive tension in any area of the body after a posture, we must try to alleviate it with a counter pose. That is the simplest asana that relieves the tension. The counter pose for a powerful forward bend is a gentle back bend. Conversely, a powerful back bend will be followed by a simple forward bend. Again, the reason for practicing counter poses is to return the body to its normal condition and to ensure that no tensions are carried on into the next posture or into our everyday business. Observing the principle of dual effects and thereby determining the sequence of asanas in your session is one way of bringing vinyasa krama into your practice. The step by step awareness of vinyasa krama should also be a part of the practice of an individual asana and the development of a practice over time. Designing a session. Now we are going to look at how to build the sequence of an asana session. The way we develop a session will depend on our immediate needs, our long term goals, and what activities are going to follow our practice. A course of asanas designed to prepare body for playing tennis will be different from one meant to help someone remain alert in a mentally taxing environment. And that will differ from a practice meant to help someone with a chronic insomnia to relax deeply before going to bed. There are countless asanas, and it seems just as many books about them. How does one begin to make choices about what postures to practice? The list of possible asanas are endless because the body's great flexibility allows almost limitless possibilities as far as posture goes. It is entirely up to student, in light of both his lifestyles and goals, to determine whether it makes sense to practice many or only a few asanas and to determine which ones are worthwhile. Different people require different asanas. For instance, many of us are so stiff in the legs that we need to practice a lot of standing postures. On the other hand, dancers with flexible, well formed legs are so supple that there is no reason for them to put a lot of effort into standing postures. There are a great many asanas, but we do not need to practice all of them. It is much more important to find a direction for our practice and to draw up a sequence of asanas that meets our own needs and through which we can discover the qualities that are to be found in asana practice. A teacher is an important resource for helping make these choices. Our point of departure for practice will be different every day. That may be difficult to put into effect in the beginning. But the more we get into practice of an authentic yoga, the more we will understand how to observe ourselves and find our own starting point each time. The situation from which we begin our practice is constantly changing. Let's say I hurt my knee yesterday and I therefore cannot sit cross legged in the morning. I would then do exercises to help me loosen my knee. It is important to examine a condition before starting and continually throughout a practice. If we bend forward from a standing position, for instance, we will feel whether our legs and back are stiff. These things are easy to discover when we begin to be attentive to the body. Once we begin to observe ourselves in this way and recognize our starting point, we are able to develop a practice for the greatest possible benefits. Certain principles should be followed in determining how to begin a session. Before doing an asana, we should be sure that the body is ready for it. For instance, if we try to sit cross legged first thing in the morning before observing our bodies or preparing our legs properly, we can very easily damage our knees. Gentle warm up exercises will ease the body into readiness. It is not a good idea to start a practice with back bends or twists. We should begin each practice with the simplest poses. Asanas that bend the body forward naturally, or those in which we raise our arms or legs are suitable. Beginning with the simple postures, we gradually progress toward more difficult ones. Some asanas with which we can begin a practice are shown in figure 6. These include Tadasana, mountain pose, Uttanasana, forward bend, Apanasana, wind relieving pose, and raised Vajrasana, thunderbolt pose. Figure 7 shows asanas with which we should not begin our practice. These include Shirsasana, headstand, Trikonasana, triangle pose, Dhanurasana, bow pose, and Halasana, plow pose. There are two ways of practicing an asana. The dynamic practice repeats the movement into the asana and out again in rhythm with the breath. In static practice, we move into and out of pose in the same way as with the dynamic practice, but instead of staying in continual movement with the breath, we hold the pose for a certain number of breath cycles. Directing our attention toward the breath, certain areas of the body, or both. Depending on the goals we have for performing that particular asana, dynamic movements allow the body to get used to the position gently and gradually. For this reason, it is always better to practice an asana dynamically first before attempting to hold it. There are other important benefits to be gained from the dynamic form of practice. For example, Many asanas cause great problems for beginners when they try to hold them in static practice for a lengthy period of time. As well, experienced practitioners of yoga often get caught in the habit of focusing their attention on fixing the posture somehow in static practice rather than really working in it and exploring its possibilities. A dynamic practice gives us greater possibilities for bringing breath to particular parts of the body and heightening the intensity of the effect. A dynamic performance of asanas therefore not only helps to prepare for difficult static postures but also intensifies the practice of a particular asana or gives it a special direction. For all these reasons, the dynamic practices of asana should be an essential part of every yoga session, whether you're a beginner or more advanced practitioner. Figure 8 and 9 show dynamic practice sequences. In Figure 8, Paschimottanasana, seated forward bend, is performed continuously. The student moving in a fluid manner from step 1 to step 2 and back to step 1, repeating this sequence several times on the rhythm of the breath. Only after preparing the body in this way it is sensible to go into a seated forward bend and hold the position while continuing to breathe. Over time, we can gradually increase the number of breaths we take while holding the pose. The sequence shown in Figure 9 is more strenuous. In this practice of Parsva Uttanasana, a standing forward bend, we move from step 1 to step 2 on an inhale and step 2 to step 3 on an exhale. Then we inhale to go back to step 2, exhale to step 3, and continue in this pattern for several cycles. We finally come back to step 1 on an exhale. Repeating the entire sequence on each cycle would be a less strenuous way of practicing this posture dynamically. The number of repetitions in a dynamic practice session is a question of individual needs and requirements. In practicing the standing forward bend dynamically, the legs may become tired or we may experience back strain. Such symptoms are a sure sign that we have overstepped our limits, and they come too late to be reliable first indications that we have even reached a limit. It is the breath alone that can give us early enough warning that we have pushed ourselves too far. As I said before, as long as we can quietly follow our breath, we will remain within the limits of our own physical abilities. The moment we have to draw a rapid breath through the nose or mouth without maintaining the gentle, even sound in the throat, we must stop practicing that sequence. Our symmetrical poses must be done with the same number of breaths to each side, so account for this before finishing. We will gradually build the stamina to increase the number of repetitions for any given pose. If we want to hold an asana within a sequence of postures, we can achieve more if we repeat it dynamically first. If we have set ourselves a particular asana as a long term goal, practicing dynamic variations will be the best help on the way to achieving that goal. Counter poses should be practiced dynamically whenever possible to lessen the risk of creating new areas of tension in the body. Examples of appropriate counter poses. The following few paragraphs will give you an idea of how the principle of balancing effects through the choice of counter poses is applied in a yoga practice. As I mentioned earlier, various counter poses will be necessary for countering the effects of headstand. See figure 10. Those who have a sway back will want to follow Shirsasana with a counter pose for the lower back because the headstand can focus a lot of tension there. Apanasana, the wind relieving pose, is suitable for this. Practicing the headstand requires also practicing the shoulder stand, Sarvangasana, which relieves the pressure on the neck. Because the shoulder stand is itself a very demanding static pose, it too requires a counter pose such as the Cobra, Bhujangasana, Sequences such as this, in which poses and counter poses follow each other, play an important part in our practice. Figure 11 shows possible counter poses for Uttanasana, forward fold. Whenever we feel tension in the legs after practicing Uttanasana, Utkatasana, the squatting pose may be useful. Chakravakasana may benefit a sore back resulting from Uttanasana, or it may well be enough to simply rest the back in Shavasana, the corpse pose. Figure 12 shows some asanas and example of counter pose for each. At this point, it should be clear that a good yoga practice is not haphazard but instead follows certain principles. The principles that give a practice an intelligent structure are: begin where you are, warm up and loosen the whole body at the start of the session. Before you perform an asana, make sure you know and can perform an appropriate counter pose. Practice an asana dynamically before holding it. Practice the counter pose immediately following the main asana. Make sure the counter pose is simpler than the main asana. Let me clarify these principles for you with two examples of simple asana sequences. Whether the following sequence of asanas is beneficial for a particular person depends on many factors, including the structure and flexibility of the spine, the flexibility of legs and hips. Consider these sequences as examples only, knowing that you own your own carefully constructed practice will take into account your unique structure and your particular goals. Figure 13 shows a short sequence of approaching Paschimottanasana, the seated forward bend. We start in Samasthiti, the standing pose, to make contact with the body and breath. We then warm up by practicing Uttanasana, forward fold, dynamically, repeating the sequence several times. This forward bend is the first preparation for Paschimottanasana. We then practice Parshva Uttasana, repeating the posture four times, beginning with holding for one breath, then two, then three, and finally four breaths. Then change sides and repeat. In this way, we can gradually increase the stretch in the legs. As a counter pose for the work in the legs, we then perform a dynamic version of Chakravakasana so that we do not take any tension into the next posture. Then rest a while in Shavasana. Now we are ready to practice the main asana, Paschimottanasana. We first practice it dynamically in preparation for the static posture and as an aid for feeling the part of the breath plays in this exercise. We stretch upward as we breathe in and bend forward as we breathe out. One possible way of working in the posture is to feel the moment of the inhalation in the back as we straighten it. Then feel the movement of belly toward the spine as we breathe out, bending forward without losing the extension. After practicing Paschimottanasana dynamically, we stay in the pose for several breaths, paying attention to both body and breath. Dvipada Pitham can be used as a counterpose to the seated forward bend, bridge pose. In order to open the hips and compensate for the powerful forward bend, the practice of this asana would finish with a long rest in Shavasana. The next sequence of asanas given an example of gentle practice for backward bending postures. Without preparations and counter poses, back bends can lead to cramps, pain, and other problems. The sequence of asanas shown in figure 14 gives good preparation and resolution exercises for the backward bending pose, Shalabhasana, locust pose. All of the exercises in this sequence are practiced dynamically. The warm up is a simple exercise to link the breath with the movement, yet the back is already being gently exercised. As moving the arms upward causes a slight movement in the spine, a variation of Apanasana follows to help loosen the lower back. Then the gentle back bend of the first exercise is repeated, but in the slightly different form of lying with the knees bent. Dvipadapitham is a more powerful exercise. We must be very careful in this asana to go just a little higher with each inhale. The back certainly has to work here, although it is assisted by the legs. Bridge pose, Dvipadapitham, is followed by a short rest. A variation of Chakravakasana can release the tensions in the back that may have come with doing Dvipadapitham. We prepare the back further with a simple variation of Bhujangasana. Finally, we are ready to practice a simple variation of Shalabhasana. The back now has to support the legs as well as the trunk. It has been made ready by all the exercises preceding you. After Salabhasana, we have another short rest with knees bent and the feet on the floor to relieve the back. A Pratikriyasana or counterpose for Shalabhasana is Apanasana, which relaxes the lower back. The sequence ends with a rest. The breath. The inhalation and exhalation can be emphasized in various ways in asana practice. We can divide the breath into four parts: the inhalation, the exhalation, the retention after inhalation, the retention after exhalation. We use breath retention in our asana practice to intensify the effects of a posture. Let us suppose we are bothered by a feeling of heaviness in the abdominal region and have decided to practice the seated forward bend to help us feel lighter. We can practice the asana in its simplest form, that is dynamically, with a slow breath rhythm. Or we might also bend forward on the exhalation as usual, contracting the abdomen as we do. But instead of coming up again the right way, we might stay in that position and hold the breath for a few seconds. Holding the breath after exhalation intensifies the effects of asana on the abdominal region. Conversely, holding the breath after inhalation in certain asanas intensifies the effects in the chest region. As a working rule, the following principles apply in a yoga practice. An emphasis on long inhalation and holding the breath after inhalation intensifies the effects of posture in the chest area. An emphasis on long exhalation and holding the breath after exhalation intensifies the effects of the posture in the abdominal area. The forward bending poses lend themselves to holding the breath following exhalation, and while the backward bending poses lead themselves to holding the breath following inhalation. The practice of lengthening the exhalation or holding the breath after exhalation is called langana in Sanskrit, meaning to fast or to reduce. Langana Langan supports the elimination processes and has a cleansing effect on the body by enlivening the organs, especially the organs in the abdominal region. So, for example, if someone has a problem in the area below the diaphragm, it could benefit them to do a Langan practice. The practice of lengthening the inhalation or holding the breath after inhalation is called Brahmana. The best translates to expand. Brahmana practice has the effect of energizing and heating the body. A Brahmana element should be introduced in the practice of a student who lacks energy. The ability to lengthen the exhale should be achieved before introducing Brahmana, as too much fire without elimination can create disturbing patterns of energy. To receive that which is new, fresh energy, we must first release what is old and no longer benefits us. Figure 15 shows the principles of Langan and Brahman applied to asanas. The warrior pose, Virabhadrasana, is by its very nature an asana that works in a Brahman way. Practice with a long inhalation, perhaps followed by a short breath retention. It will work even more profoundly in an expansive direction. The seated forward bend is an asana to which principle of Langan naturally applies. Through a deliberate and slow exhalation, possibly followed by holding the breath, the effect of asana is intensified. There is one very important rule to follow. If holding the breath reduces the duration of your next inhale or exhale, stop. You're not ready for this practice and you can work up to it instead. In terms of the circulatory system, the breath should never be held if there is a sudden increase in the pulse rate. Heartbeat and respiration are interdependent, and if the breathing is poor, the pulse increases. There are psychological reasons for this rule too. Many people are very nervous about their hearts, and a rapid increase in their pulse rate might cause anxiety. The guiding principle is that holding the breath should never make you uneasy, but rather we should be able to observe quietly the quality of a breathing. The principles of Langan and Brahman can be used to good advantage only with appropriate knowledge and understanding. They must never be applied without careful consideration of particular circumstances. I shall go into this in more detail when we discuss pranayama. About resting. Now, a few words on something else that is important in the way we plan a yoga practice: rest between asanas. We must, of course, rest whenever we become out of breath or are no longer able to control our breath. But even if our breathing remains quiet and regular, certain parts of the body may become tired or perhaps sore. We must rest them as well. Also, if we have decided to practice an asana 12 times and we feel exhausted after the sixth time, then we must stop immediately and go into stillness. There is one rule to follow regarding rest. If we need a rest, we take one. We also take a rest as a way of making transition between one kind of asana and another. For instance, it is essential to rest between an intense back bend, such as Dhanurasana, and a powerful forward bend such as Paschimottanasana. We must give ourselves this rest even if we do not feel the need for it. The rest gives us the opportunity to feel the effects of the posture and allows the muscles time to return to their balanced tone. If we do not rest after doing Dhanurasana, as in our example, we may overwork the back in the following forward bend. To avoid this, we must rest and observe the reaction of our muscles and whole body. Let me give you another example. Many people feel good while they are performing a headstand, but when they lie down afterward, they notice a pressure in the chest. We know that when we stand on the head, the weight of the abdomen is on the chest and compresses the ribs. Though we might not feel pressure until we rest, the feeling in the chest is only the reaction of the ribs and will be relieved by resting before performing the counter pose. Generally, one should rest between one intense pose and an equally demanding counter pose, such as with the headstand and the shoulder stand. However, if the counter pose is very simple, you can go directly into it without a break. A period of rest is also needed before practicing pranayam. In pranayam, our attention is directed primarily toward the breath. While during asana practice, our breathing depends on the various physical exercises. Because the asanas requires us to pay attention to the body, it is good to rest afterward and prepare ourselves mentally for pranayam. How long we will rest before pranayam will depend on how many asanas we have just practiced. If we have been doing asanas for 15 minutes, then 2 or 3 minutes of rest will do. If we have been practicing for an hour or more, we should rest for at least 5 minutes before going into pranayam. While I have been giving you examples of sequences for the full practice of certain asanas, including warm ups and counter poses, it is important to recognize that a book can never match the qualities of a good teacher. The best way towards self discovery and gaining greater insight into your own body and mind through yoga is to seek the advice of a teacher. The practice of yoga is essentially a practice of self examination. Asanas and pranayam can help us discover certain things about ourselves, but unfortunately, we cannot always trust our own perceptions. Our habitual way of seeing things makes it difficult for us to look at them differently from experience to experience. Our habitual way of seeing limits our self understanding. Because a teacher's perception is not limited by a unique conditioning, he or she can often see what capabilities lie hidden in us. Books on yoga begin at different levels. A person with little experience in yoga would have difficult time choosing the asanas best suited for his or her condition. A good teacher is important for finding out which postures are most useful and on which ones the student needs guidance. A teacher helps us in getting to know ourselves and inspires us to do the work toward greater self discovery. A book can support the encouragement that comes from the teacher. For the purpose of introducing Krishnamacharya's yoga teachings to a wide audience, I have chosen to write this book. The asana sequence I describe, of course, do not take into account any one individual's personal needs. You must tailor these general sequences to suit your goals. People often ask whether there is a general sequence of asanas suitable for anyone to follow. Yes, we can think about an order of asanas in a general way. To simplify things, let's ignore the fact that yoga practice must be geared to a particular person and his and her individual needs, and therefore can never follow a general plan absolutely. Let us, for the time being, forget about the fact that certain asanas require particular preparation or counter poses for certain people, or that a sequence of asanas has to allow for rest now and then. We have already discussed these thoroughly. Let us shift the focus of our attention to the way we can group the asanas according to the position of the body relative to the earth and to the basic movement of spine. We can divide the asanas into standing postures, those performed lying on the back, inverted postures, those performed lying on the stomach, back bends, and finally sitting and kneeling postures. Which of these asanas should we choose and what order might be sensible? Figure 16 illustrates some postures suggested in this general sequence. At the start of our practice, we need exercises that warm us up, make us supple, and use the whole body. Standing asanas are best for this. They are suitable for loosening up all the joints, including the ankles, knees, hips, spine, shoulders, neck, and to a certain extent, the wrists as well. There are people who often have problems in the hips, knees, and ankles. The other people who, for various reasons, are not able to begin in a standing position. The majority of us, however, should spend 5 to 10 minutes warming up with standing asanas. The exercises with which we begin our practice should also help us to experience and observe the state of our body and breath. The start of our practice should be designed so that we can find out about our physical and mental states in a simple and risk free manner. Simple standing postures afford us this opportunity. After doing the standing postures, it is a good idea to lie on your back and practice asanas in this position, which are also useful preparation for the inverted postures to come. The inverted postures help counter the effects of gravity on the body and are also very important for our inner cleansing. Furthermore, the well-known inverted postures such as headstand and the shoulder stand put us in positions that are completely opposite to our normal daily positioning. These postures allow us the opportunity to discover new and previously unknown aspects of ourselves. After the inverted posture comes a group of asanas performed lying on the belly. These are all back bends. Some of these asanas are excellent counter poses for certain inverted postures. For example, the cobra harmonizes the effects of the shoulder stand and is often used as its counter pose. This general sequence of asanas can be concluded with some exercises in a sitting or kneeling position. Then, after an adequate rest, we can practice pranayam and other exercises that require an upright position. Appendix 2 shows four general practice sequences that can be tailored to fit individual needs. Figure 17 shows a good sequence of asanas practiced as minimum preparation for pranayama. Uttanasana can be practiced as a warm up to prepare the back and neck to experience the quality of our breath. We could then practice Dvipada Pitham, the bridge pose, Chakravakasana, opens the chest and back, a rest lying on the back, and concludes the asana practice. Then some of us might choose a simple cross-legged position, Sukhasana, in which to practice pranayama. Others for whom this is uncomfortable might be better off sitting on a chair. Nothing is lost by sitting on a chair, and the quality of breathing in pranayama is not adversely affected. If you are planning to work with certain breathing patterns, such as predetermined lengths of inhalation and exhalation or breath retention, then asanas such as these have the added advantage of putting us in touch with our breath before we begin our pranayama practice. Just as the practice of specific asanas is dependent on the student's needs and goals, so is the time of the day chosen for our practice dependent on what is possible. The one rule to follow in this respect is to wait 2 or 3 hours following a meal to begin yoga practice. Practicing on an empty stomach is best. So, for those who have flexible daily schedule, the best time for practice is before breakfast. A practice has to be developed daily, taking into account our free time, our goals, and our needs. We must always plan a practice as a unit, irrespective of whether the time is available is short or long, so that the session is always made up of a balanced group of exercises. If there is a danger of being interrupted or running out of time during your practice, then it's better to plan a short sequence of asanas. Through adhering to the principle of Vinyasa Krama, we construct a gradual and intelligent course for a yoga practice that helps us meet our goals.